So, hello everybody. This is a great pleasure to have you all here. I hope you can hear me. The people in the audience here have to have the headphones, and our colleagues in other parts of the world are listening and viewing us streaming in a streamed way. So, we have 45 minutes, so I need to get going quickly. We are going to talk about nature-based solutions and how these can be applied to the tourism sector. As you know, in 2020, IUCN launched the global standard for nature-based solutions. And since then, we have really tried to mainstreaming them in different sectors and in particular business. And the question we ask ourselves is, how can business use nature-based solutions as part of their toolkit to address their impacts or dependencies on nature? And since then, we have been involved as IUCN in a very interesting initiative that was led by the World Resource Institute that led to the formation of a coalition. And I'm actually going to ask now Megan to give us 5 seconds about what is this coalition and what is it going to do about nature-based solutions. But before you do that, I'll give you a little bit of an overview of what is going to happen on the panel. So we are going to have first an introduction about nature-based solutions and the standard and how this could apply to the tourism sector by Chris Maggiero, who is a colleague from IUCN. Then we are going to have Megan Moricausa from Iberostar, who's going to talk about an example from her company on how they're using nature-based solutions. And then Luca Santarossa from WWF Mediterranean, also speaking about examples from the Med on how nature-based solutions can be connected to tourism. We will hopefully have some time also for a few questions from the audience. And then let's get going. So Megan, over to you quickly to tell us what is TAXO and what is the connection to what we are doing today.
Absolutely. As Julie was saying, there is the standard, but the standard also has a vehicle in which to be applied and implemented. And after the high-level panel for a sustainable ocean and the nations that committed to sustainably manage 100% of their national waters, various action coalitions were born in order to bring this within the sectors that have relevance in these individual waters, and tourism was one of them. Iberostar is one of the co-chairs of the Tourism Action Coalition for a Sustainable Ocean, along with the Ocean Foundation, but it has many members that are fully focused on implementing these actions themselves, members from industry, members from NGOs and IGOs, that all help us give a realistic action-oriented way to implement the nature-based solution standard. And I'm looking forward today to talk to you a little bit about how one of those examples is realized in some of the work we're doing with Iberostar.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Megan. So over to you, Chris, to give us an overview of the link between nature-based solutions and tourism.
I'll stand. So thanks so much, Julia. And what I'm going to do now is just give us an overview of what really is nature-based solutions and where we are at, so that you can understand once we start talking about this standardization, what do we actually mean? Development and environment are portrayed as conflicting models. This is what comes to mind when you think about development and environment. Development is the sleek brother, quite fast. Environment is standing on her way. It's slow. When you talk about development and environment, traditionally this is where we are placed. But this is not the real model. We know that nature and environment are intricately connected. They are one connected to the other. We cannot keep talking about nature and environment in this way. A bit of a history about where we are coming from. In the early years of conservation, we used to talk about conservation for its sake. It was dominated by, science around species, science around genetics, and this was the early years. In the latter years now, 2000 coming down, we started talking about this intricate connections, nature and people. In 2010, going forward, this has changed quite a bit, because now it is not about protecting nature so that they protect people, but protecting nature and people in the same step. So this has evolved over the years. And this is where we are as we speak now. I'll let you read through the definition. But as you read through that, the key thing around nature-based solutions is that you can be able to intentionally design programs and projects that benefit nature on one hand and benefit people. The three principles are around protecting nature, sustainable managing nature, and restoring nature. This is what the definition talks about when we talk about nature-based solutions. At the heart of nature-based solutions is solving a problem. That is where it starts. So when you're thinking about nature-based solutions, think about it in these terms. What is the problem that I'm actually solving? And within the standard, a couple of problems have been identified. Food security, water security, climate change, we are quite familiar with it. We know what is happening in the world now. I think this is two of the most unusual years in the decade. Flooding, health diseases. The IPCC report is out. We know where we're heading to. We're not heading in a very optimistic direction in terms of the reports out there. Nature-based solution is about extending the reach of what we have now. Conservation itself was for providing us with that approach of we can conserve species, we can conserve ecosystems. NBS is extending that reach and bringing the economic aspect into it, the development aspect into it, which means that we can have a much greater impact in terms of our reach, in terms of mobilization, not only of resources, but of actors who can be able to offer solutions. This is what NBS is about. For this slide is one of the ones we use to differentiate. There is aspects of greenwashing you can find out there when you talk about nature-based solutions. A solution can be nature-derived, which means it uses environmental resources. And we call it green energy, for example, when you check out wind energy. Or it can be nature-inspired, which is more of biomimicry, using designs that can actually act like nature. For example, a beetle, designing a house like the beetle which harnesses water from the environment. But those are really, we need to know that they're differentiated from the NBSs, the nature-based solutions, because they do not necessarily benefit people. You can have a windmill, but it could be standing somewhere out in the open, has no positive influence on nature, or even has a negative impact on nature. Nature-based solution brings these two balances together. How do we then move forward with this? So we know the framework, we know what we want to achieve. The standard itself gives us some consistency of how to achieve this. We've talked about what is nature-based solutions in essence. There is the aspect that what nature-based solutions is not. And the standard stands in between this to guide this process. It helps us to have a consistent approach. It helps us to know, be able to identify what we can call nature-based solutions and what it is not. It also helps us to clean up the greenwashing that can be there when you talk about nature-based solutions. Because as you're aware, it could be a buzzword, but what does it really mean? The standard now stands in between there. And those are a few things. It safeguards us, engages stakeholders as well, in terms of a wider reach and scaling up, etc., etc. I will dig a bit into the standard, and not too much. We have societal challenges at the center. I've talked about that. The other principle is designing at scale. And when you talk about scale, it is not about just the ecosystem, looking at it as a whole, but also looking at the diversity of actors within that ecosystem. We talk about now the economic, the biodiversity net gains and the social aspect. When you design a solution, it has to have gains to the biodiversity. It has to have a positive impact on people, but also we think very closely about how governance is included in that. So it's a process that is not dispossessing communities, indigenous communities, over their rights, especially when we talk about land. The other one we talk about is a balance. Anytime you have this kind of...
Chers visiteurs, nous vous invitons à l'avant-première du film
Sorry,
Animal
that was a bit
de
destructive.
Cyril Dion. La projection aura lieu dans l'auditorium du Palais des Congrès à 18h30. Les badges sont à retirer à l'entrée du hall 2.
Okay.
Dear visitor, we welcome you to the preview of Cyril Dion's film
yeah.
Animal. The screening will take place in the Congress Palace auditorium.
Then,
The badge will be under
okay,
at the entry of hall 2.
okay. That's it. Don't do it. So, anytime you have to deal with social, economic, environmental balance, something will have to give way. And this criteria caters for that. It asks us the question, what will you give up today for tomorrow? Which solution will work today? For example, if you're looking at coastal protection, would it be worth putting some green infrastructure that would protect people today? As you think about putting on the green infrastructure today, as you think about bringing on the green infrastructure over time, such trade-offs are addressed by this particular criteria. Adaptive management is something that we talk about a lot, but in practice, we do not see it a lot. But how do we learn from what we are doing? And then, vice versa as well. Do from learning and learn from doing. Finally, NBS is very strong on mainstreaming and influencing not just local action, but action at different levels, national, regional, and international. How are these actions you're choosing influencing, the policies, not just in the country, but also the conventions, because they're the ones which are driving towards mobilization. This is a summary. I won't go into this, but just say that there are 8 criteria and 28 indicators that guide you to the standard. We just go into one of the criteria to give you a feeling of what the criteria feels like inside. This is criteria 3. It talks about net gains. Under it, it has a number of sub-indicators. This is one that has been chosen, so that the action directly responds to evidence-based assessment, etc., etc. Beyond that, it gives you some guides of what you really mean by this sub-indicator. And then it gives you metrics for rating what you're doing. And this is what it looks like. So it's pretty detailed, and a lot of thought has gone into it. I won't go into the detail, but there will be resources, that you could access to learn more about that. When you're done with your assessment, this is what the result will look like. This is what your interface looks like. It tells you what is weak and what is strong. For example, in this case, the solution that was assessed was addressing quite conclusively societal challenges, but a bit weak when you talk about economic. So it also gives you an indicator of some places that you can improve. These are the resources you can access to learn more about the standard NBS indicators. You can, I hope you'll be able to access that at some point, and also just, give yourself a brief. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chris. A very, the standard is a tool, and something, is a challenge as well. And so we're going to hear from Megan how they have been using the standard. Also, and don't forget, this is like a, learning by doing. It's the standard has been launched recently, and we are all, different organizations, different entities in business are looking for, at the standard as a template to design good projects. but we are, it's not a competition. It's really, however, is everybody's trying to improve. So, Megan, tell us a little bit about the experience of Verostar with the standard and, well, with nature-based solutions.
Thank you, Chris. Hopefully we'll have a great example of a student here putting this into practice. So my name is Megan Morikawa, and I'm the Global Director of Sustainability at Iberostar Group. And I want to talk to you guys about one of the nature-based solutions that we're implementing in our hotels today. But I think it's very clear, and one of the major themes that we see at this conference is that marine and coastal ecosystems are in decline, whether that be even in best case scenario of 1.5 degrees of warming by 2050, we will still likely lose 90% of our reefs, or the declines that we're seeing in our mangroves and other coastal ecosystems. This is a serious problem that very clearly has consequences for the businesses that depend on that beach and that resource as their main form of business, which is very much the case for our business. At Iberostar Group, we're a Spanish-based multinational luxury resort company that have 120 properties in about 19 countries around the world, 8 million clients per year, but most importantly, 80% of our hotels are coastal, depending on the beach as its primary attractor for many of our clients. And furthermore, our company is privately owned and run by a multi-generational family that is incredibly passionate about the solutions that their business can provide for the communities that they've been working in for generations and hope to continue to working on for generations. And it is part of their leadership and inspiration that allows us to work on the topics that we do today. We have a number of properties in the Caribbean, and in those properties that we have in the Caribbean, we've calculated that we have about 5.6 square kilometers of reef that are directly providing ecosystem services for our hotels and resorts, hence creating a need for us to work on the restoration and regeneration of these reef ecosystems. And so what I wanted to detail a little bit was to tell you the what it is that we're doing on reef ecosystems in many of these locations. And to tell you the what, I think it's important to start with the why. You can see that in one of our properties in Cancun, just with the last 2 hurricanes that passed through in the 2020 hurricane season, we lost nearly half of the beach in an area that we conducted surveys on right in front of the properties, and there are no natural reef structures in front of these properties to help us provide nature-based solutions in this sort of context. So I think it's also important for us to think about when nature-based solutions can be applied versus when there is no infrastructure for those sorts of solutions to occur. However, if we look just a little bit to the south, we see that there are other resorts that are in front of coral reef ecosystems, and that even within, and the damage was less in each of these properties during the hurricanes. The flooding-based damage was less, but even further in just a complex that has 4 hotels right adjacent to each other, when we had a couple of coastal ecosystems that were acted as an additional buffer between the hotels, the beach, and the oceans, we found multiplicative effects of these sorts of impacts. So that is the why clearly demonstrated in some of the examples that we have within the resorts. And I think this is a very clear example of how it is that the challenges that society faces are also the challenges that industry face. And while a lot of our strategy is focused on climate change mitigation, we have a number of programs that are also looking at how we can protect and restore coastal ecosystems for blue carbon sequestration, for climate adaptation and mitigation. This example that I'm going to dive into further is talking about coastal resilience, so how we can protect ourselves from extreme weather events and flooding. But you'll see that many of these solutions also feed back to a number of the other societal risks like water security.
Nous vous invitons à l'avant-première du film Animal de Cyril Dion. La projection aura lieu dans l'auditorium du Palais des Congrès à 18h30. Les badges sont à retirer à l'entrée du hall numéro 2.
We now know this also comes in English.
Dear visitors, we welcome you to the preview of Cyril Dion's film Animal. The screening will take place in the Congress Palace Auditorium at 6:30. The badge will be handed out at the entry of the hall 2.
We hope those of you watching remotely caught that commercial for a film later to come. So I think it's important to recognize that within this context, we needed to then design the objectives for our reef restoration program. Because what are we restoring to, right? It's not about numbers or surface area or survival rates. Those are metrics that get us to a destination point that says if we want to restore for coastal protection, that means we need to reach some level of rugosity and wave attenuation in order to make sure that these reefs are actually providing the ecosystem services that are entrenched within this nature-based solution context. Importantly, too, when you work towards coastal protection, which is something that might look quite different than some of the other destinations of reef restoration, you also get proxies that you can measure, like how does this enhance fish biomass feeding into food security, and how can this be done in a way where we are choosing species to make sure that there's high biodiversity, so numbers of species that are going into these restoration efforts, but also utilizing and understanding that not all coral will respond to global threats in the future equally. In fact, this is what I did my PhD on when I was at Stanford, and how we can help to restore coral reefs that were more resilient to climate change. So how can we also use existing local diversity to help us stack the cards in our favor in any of these sorts of operations? We take a three-pronged approach for this work, and it's all internal within the organization, working as well in partnerships with external groups, which first starts with research, then goes into management planning, and then goes into operations. And so we believe that in the same way that if a hotel chooses to have a garden, they have a department that is there to curate the natural resources of those gardens and those facilities and resources for their guests and for their employees and for the products. Similarly, how can we extend this to going into coral gardening? Or how can we extend this so that we have an operations team helping us to be able to implement these sorts of solutions? And to give you a taste of what it is that this looks like, we are working with Sinvestav, Seascape Caribbean, and Fundamar in the Dominican Republic, in Mexico, and in Jamaica on establishing multi-species, multi-individual coral nurseries that we're currently working on methodologies to see whether or not we can help to maintain high levels of genetic diversity that is also more likely to survive future bleaching events. This is done within a management context. So we actually have a coastal team, a set of coastal team regional managers and coordinators who help us to be able to ensure that we're engaging the communities working within existing marine protected areas. As is the case in the Dominican Republic, we're very privileged to work with one of our coastal health regional coordinators who was able to really establish that if you do this work within the marine protected area in the southern part of the Dominican Republic, you're likely to have better results in terms of how your coral respond to stressful events. But in places where we don't have marine protected areas established, we're working with the local community to be able to find ways to create new sanctuaries. And so, for example, here we have another one of our coastal health coordinators working on establishing a marine sanctuary alongside the fishing community that lives next to us in the hotel. This all needs to be entrenched in data collection that must be done at the locations where we are working. And so we have our science team that helps us to be able to implement studies and research that look at things like the rugosity of the reefs where we're doing the work, or what sort of methodology allows for the best survivorship of coral reefs, or whether or not these coral are more or less likely to bleach in certain scenarios that we can recreate in a coral lab that we built within one of our facilities in the Dominican Republic to simulate future bleaching events. This is something that, given the amount of time, I won't go into great depth, but wanted to just kind of show a demonstration of how you can apply the IUCN Global Standard for Nature-Based Solutions through the various steps that allow us to, in this context, address the challenge of the impact of extreme weather conditions on tourism destinations and the restoration of, therefore, structural complexity in the coral reefs in the subaquatic area. And there's a lot of really great research that has demonstrated that healthy, thriving reefs can help to absorb up to 97% of the wave energy during extreme weather events. And we can take this standard by standard to look for some of these examples. And so we've attempted to do a self-assessment of the stoplight plus one, because there's 4 levels approach, on how it is that we're working on any of these given topics. But I think a couple of really interesting examples in the self-assessment demonstrate that some of the areas in which we are lacking are areas that the entire scientific field is lacking in. For example, what are the indicators that need to be assessed in order to establish that reef restoration for coastal protection is successful? I think we're just starting to understand that wave height and rugosity and the energy dissipation that these efforts have are something important for us to be able to measure, let alone have the technology to measure this in many locations all throughout the year in the first place. We can also see other areas where we've been able to excel quite quickly in looking at how we can design nature-based solutions that are informed by scale. A lot of this is about entrenching this within the business case so that we have a reason to not only scale this within our own business in multiple destinations of you've seen, but also to make the case to other hotels in the regions why this is something that hopefully will help us to showcase protection during extreme weather events, and if nothing else, to demonstrate potentially to insurance agencies that this sort of work helps us to reduce this stress in extreme weather events. I think another key component is to recognize, and I'll go to this one here, one of the kind of areas that we still have many questions on is in the context of how are nature-based solutions funded and financed economically. And the sub-criteria of the direct and indirect benefits and costs associated with the nature-based solution, who pays? That's a really interesting question, right? Is this something that the tourism group should be paying for entirely? To what geographic extent? These are publicly owned lands, and so this is in many instances a federal responsibility, and we're working very closely with our governments and ministries of environments in many of these destinations. But there are questions that we don't yet have the answers to, which we think that, and especially when you need to do this at scale, and so this is a really interesting topic for us to dive further in terms of applying the standard. There are many other examples here that you can see of ways in which we've evaluated this project.
Nous vous invitons à l'avant-première du film Animal de Cyril Dion. La projection aura lieu dans l'auditorium du Palais des Congrès à 18h30. Les badges sont à retirer à l'entrée du hall numéro 2. Dear visitors, we welcome you to the preview of Cyril Dion's film Animal. The screening will take place in the Congress Palace's auditorium at 6:30. The badge will be hung out at the entry of Hall 2.
Wonderful. So I jumped right to the conclusions here, which is to basically summarize that tourism and nature are clearly intertwined and that the nature-based solution standard from IUCN provides us a consistent benchmark to use across projects, but it also allows us to ask questions that the edges of knowledge are still trying to figure out, which gives us also an opportunity to redefine these relationships between the public and private sector, as well as how it is that we can implement nature-based solutions at scale. And in order to get to that scale, we needed drivers, such that an Iberostar is not the only group in these destinations doing this sort of work, which is why we're very excited to be presenting this work in the context of the Tourism Action Coalition for a Sustainable Ocean. We're so excited that some of our founding partners include large tourism groups such as Hyatt or Royal Caribbean or Intrepid or Hurtigruten, and so we're very excited on ways in which we can work with a number of these groups in the destinations that they have throughout the world, as well as the incredible CSR and sustainability work that they're already implemented to bring nature-based solutions to the tourism sector more holistically and at scale. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Megan. This is really exciting. I mean, I've been part of this taxa discussion from the beginning, and it was just a really initial idea of, let's link the IUCN nature-based solution standard with this sector and see what can be done. And this, I know it's a project that has been going on for a while, but already your, investment in time and to go over the different criteria and see how they match, this is excellent. And this is really also what we want to do as a community, to take experience and bring it together and understand also how to make the nature-based solution standard better and to work for the user. So this is certainly going to be an incredible input into the process. So after this, I'm going to ask Luca to give us an example or examples from his experience in the Mediterranean, also with using nature and as a solution. As Chris said, let's think about the nature-based solution from a problem perspective. What is your problem? So what was your problem and how have you used it?
Exactly. I'm here to speak about an experience of ecotourism. Ecotourism, roughly speaking, is nature-based tourism with a high level of sustainability, and for us, in our experience, is tourism within protected areas and coordinated, let's say, by protected area. What is the societal challenge that ecotourism tackle? Probably the stressed people from big cities or whatever, no? Or people like us spending 1 week in a fair. So we organize trips, ecotouristic trips in the package, but the selection is very tight, let's say. So what we did 10 years ago, before the NBA standard was created, let's say, we started a process that now it is in this third stage called MEET. Why MEET? MEET is an acronym for Mediterranean Experience of Ecotourism, but it is also our idea of ecotourism, that is meeting with the local community. And also starting from the local community, because also some of you knows that the prefix eco comes from the Greek oikos, that means home, no? So for us, ecotourism is entering in the home of someone. It is normal, no? In Europe and Mediterranean, we don't have a wilderness without inhabitants, let's say. So the starting point was to solve the societal challenge that is for the local communities to receive people. Okay, so this was the problem. So we started our approach based on a participatory approach, so involving engaging local communities, but also measuring the sustainability of our packages, because the project, in few words, asked the pilot parks to set up, together with local business actors, of course, to set up long packages, at least 3 days, but usually we organize 4, 5, 6 days for a trip, and to test it with external expert to see quality, etc., but especially to measure the sustainability of these packages. Sustainability from environmental point of view, environmental ecological footprint, but also from socio-economic point of view, to see the social impacts and benefits, and economic also benefits, no? Because we know that tourists suffer the problem of the leakage. So let's say in this 3 generation of projects, starting from MEET, now the project is called Destimate, but it is the same thing. We have involved around 30 protected areas in 10 Mediterranean countries, and we have teach them how to set up a tourist package in coordination, no? In cooperation with local community, and how to measure its sustainability. That we ask the park that this sustainability must increase every 3 years. So it is a improvement process, continuous improvement process. Now the last part is to sell these products. In fact, we created an association based in Spain called MEET Network. It provides support to the involved parks, but especially try to promote and to support the purchase, the selling of these packages. And we are discovering that specific markets of nature-based tourism are interested in towards our process, our products, but the process behind. For what I said, because it is created with the local community and because it is monitored. So what we promise, we try to assure. And we have a wide variety of situations. Let's say we have, you can imagine that we have packages in the European countries where you have a high level of sustainability of the accommodation, whatever. In other countries like Tunisia, Lebanon, etc., you have more problems in find the good services, let's say. But the point is not to find the best ones. The point is to start improving process at local level with the local stakeholders as principal actors. So we force, let's say, the protected area managing bodies to stay in the process, not just to promote or to surveil, let's say. So this joint venture between body devoted to conservation and local tour operator and the other business actors create a very nice synergy that first of all improve the good benefit for the local community from social and economic point of view mainly, beside the safeguard of the environmental sustainability. We see the success of this experience from the fact that other partners, other parks are asking to enter in the network and to implement, let's say, that we also create a sort of standard. It is a process with enabling conditions, etc. So this network is increasing in terms of other parks from Morocco, from other countries that want to join this process that is pretty pretty demanding, let's say, but pretty new also from the market point of view. They appreciate it a lot.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you, Luca. Thank you, everybody. A round of applause, guys. Yes. Do you guys have any questions? Because, yes. So, but before I pass it on to you, I just have a quick question for Luca, and then, no, give it, you can give it up. Are you planning to test some of these solutions with the IUCN Global Standard?
We are trying to merge, let's say, because IUCN is in the partnership. So IUCN Med in Malaga is a big actor in this process. So we are trying to, I don't know if embedding or merging or adapting, let's say, our standard to the NBS standard, but for sure we want to apply the the NBS standard at least to one of our product. Yes.
Thank you. So I'll take this, and the question is for?
Actually, I have two questions. First question for Chris. I'm in the seafood sector, so I call standards something you can certify. So I'm just wondering why you call this a standard and not a guide or something like that. That's question one. Question two, Megan, I'm just wondering, I'm a little unclear who this standard is directed towards, because Iberostar can hire they have the resources to hire a PhD, so I don't understand why they need this standard in addition to what they're already doing. I'm just a little unclear on that.
I'll answer the question about standard and certification. So technically, this is a standard. It's developed according to ICL, code of standards and so on. It's not a certification scheme, but that's the plan we have as IUCN, is to work with other existing certification scheme and align, integrate, is different verbs have been suggested. And actually this will be launched today. I think there is going to be an event and they're going to talk about this. And we're going to have a session here on the 7th of September to discuss about the opportunities, how can this process happen in the best way. We're going to have Fair Trade International and FSC who have already committed to work with us. They're going to be here and talk to us about how can do this. So anybody interested in talking about moving from a standard to a certification schemes in a partnership approach, and this is going to be on NBS, beyond just tourism, but for example, we have the Global Sustainable Tourism Council is interested also to work about, on this kind of integration. Please come on the 7th, but that's hopefully has answered that question. And now over to Megan.
Thank you, Giulia. So I would love to answer that question, and it's actually very closely related to Giulia's answer now, which is what Iberostar does is hopefully demonstrating leadership and is impacting the ecosystems and the places where we are. But it also, we hope, is an example that others can start to think about and follow and implement on their own as well. So this is one of the reasons why we're working to try and make sure that any of the solutions that we're taking on are deeply entrenched within a why for the business to be taking this on. And in this case, it's about coastal protection and our nature-based blue carbon offsetting. We've seen a huge spike of businesses that are committing to at least 1.5 degree climate-aligned targets, or some of them as well to carbon neutrality. And so how are they going to do any of the compensation that could also give back to resilience in the destinations? And so if we're generating projects that have a why that can be scaled to other parts of the sector, they need to have a way, we need to have a way to compare these all together, right? But I think what's really important as well is that within the context of doing this sort of work, it is very challenging for small, medium enterprise to have PhDs on board. And in this sort of context, it's also incredibly challenging in some instances for them to afford or need to get to certifications, which is something that we're also seeing in the seafood space as well, in terms of the challenges of certifications for a lot of small-scale fisheries. And so I think what's also really important as we're starting to develop this sort of work is how do we get the most collective action as possible? How do we lower the barriers to entry so that many businesses, whether they're very large franchise chains, which also in many ways are just groups of small, medium enterprises that are all branded similarly, so they have very similar challenges to in terms of building arguments to their owners or to their operators to be implementing a lot of these sorts of solutions. And so these help us to be able to make sure that there's a consistent way to be evaluating the work that we're doing, as well as, most importantly, not incorrectly calling it what it is not, right? This is not, it needs to be a nature-based solution, not something that is inspired by nature.
Thank you, Megan. And this point about the greenwashing, it is very important because we just don't want to create another, buzzword and lose resources and lose attention and opportunities for a real conservation that also has a development angle. So it is important. That's why a standard, and that's why also now the discussion about certification. Rita.
Yes, thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. Megan, I've got a question to you, and that is about, you said that your Iberostar is a passionate family-owned business, but how do they also use it in terms of, attracting clients? Are the clients also aware of it? Are they using this as a draw card to also probably, to attract certain group, a certain sector of groups or kind of group of people? And are they also, for example, willing to pay for such, additional services of feeling better, maybe also to help, not to deplete ecosystems? Thank you.
A really great question, and I think what I didn't have a chance to present on is that Iberostar, our Wave of Change movement, are guided by what we call our 5 long-term commitments to 2030. The first one about circular economy, things like sending no waste to landfill across our operations by 2025 or reaching carbon neutrality by 2030. The third one about how we improve coastal ecosystems, which is what this work is focused on and about. But we also have one that 90% of clients recognize this movement in stay by 2023, and that 60% of clients choose Iberostar because of Wave of Change by 2025. So you could see that strategically, yes, it is very important for us to be integrating this into both the recognition of why one would choose Iberostar, and I think importantly as well that objective, we have what we call our kind of hidden behavior clause, behavior change clause, that we hope that people leave our resorts being better citizens for the oceans because of something that they learned or experienced or connected with while they were in this destination. I think what's important is that there's a lot of really great work that's going on, particularly by the online travel agencies, on assessing what do consumers want in tourism, and the numbers demonstrate that people, when taking a survey, will say that they want businesses to be more sustainable, that they want to travel more sustainably. But I think in reality, it takes a little bit of a push and pull to have that actually demonstrate into higher valuation. There's a lot of surveys that some say they would be willing to pay more for the experience, others that actually say that they need to be given incentives in order to travel more sustainably, because there's a lot of really interesting associations between sustainable tourism and high luxury, which doesn't necessarily, we believe, need to be the case. It's something that can be an integral part of business, but it does have some sort of curve that hopefully breaks the relationship in terms of the budget margin and profitability or luxury categorization of the hotel itself. So per the second part of the question, it's complicated, but I think it really comes down to the storytelling, the ways in which you connect into each of these destinations, as well as finding a way to create loyalty within the product as well, which is a very important business initiative for many of these sorts of groups as well. And so there's all sorts of really fascinating discussion in that context.
Thank you, Megan. We have time for one more question. Anybody? Any taker? Okay. All right. Well, so I'd like to thank you all for coming. Thank you in the audience. I just wanted to remind you that there are other events related to tourism. I was going to list them, but then I realized actually we have a fantastic, app, a program. If you put tourism, you will see them all. So there is no need for me to do that. But there are other events. Also, what is important is there is a tourism and protected area specialist group. As for those who don't know the IUCN system, we have 6 commissions, and within these commissions there are a number of, a lot of specialist groups. This specialist group is associated to the World Protected Area, to the World Commission on Protected Areas, and so it's called TAPAS. That you will remember. And so if you want to learn more about what IUCN does on tourism in protected areas, you search for IUCN Tapas and you will find it. And you will find also members of Tapas in the different tourism events in the next few days. I'm going to be here for the entire period of the forum, so you can contact me, come over and talk to me. I don't know, Megan, how long are you staying?
Till the end of the.
Excellent. So thank you very much for coming, and let's make sure that we use this NBS in a proper way. And there is actually an entire pavilion over there on nature-based solutions. So for those who are interested in NBS beyond tourism, there is also another program to look at. Okay? Thank you very much.
Thank you.